Hello. It is time for us to begin. So if you want to come in and grab a seat. If you're visiting with us, we thank you for being here. We know that family is traveling a lot during these times. This being Christmas Day, some of you will leave tomorrow, or some will have family coming in tomorrow. We wish everyone safe travels, and we hope that you have a good time with your family. And speaking of family, tonight's subject is all about family. We're going to be talking about contention. Contention from the book of Proverbs. And I say that tongue-in-cheek, but we do argue with our family members. We have, spats and disagreements with our family members. But the important thing about family is that at the end of the day, you're still family. And so you have to get around arguments and contentions or strife. Now, when we're talking about it from the perspective of Proverbs, we're going to be talking about contention with unbelievers, and we're also going to be talking about contention with believers. Okay, of course, in the Old Testament, the New Testament church wasn't established yet, but the same verses still apply as it would in the Old Law. Now, Proverbs, we're going to start off talking about the origins of contention. All right, so number one, how do we find contention, or how does contention find us, might be a better way to put that. Number one, let's go to Proverbs chapter 6. Proverbs chapter 6, and we're going to start there in verse number 12. My version will say crooked speech. Your version may have something a little bit different. Froward might be a word that is used there. What we mean by crooked speech is lying or misleading. And that is something that often leads to contention. So let's start there in verse number 12 and go through verse number 14. A worthless person, a wicked man, goes about with crooked speech. He winks with his eyes and signals with his feet. He points with his finger. With a perverted heart, he devises evil, continually sowing discord. Now, we are going to bring that word discord back up in our second slide, but I want you to remember that lying or misleading, crooked speech, froward talk, however your version says it, it leads to contention. It leads to, at the end of that, sowing discord. Okay, so that is one way to be sure that you are going to find contention, if you lie to or about others. Number two, an anger or a hot temper. Let's go to Proverbs chapter 15 for this one. Proverbs chapter 15. And let's take a look there at verse number 18. A hot-tempered man stirs up strife, but he who is slow to anger quiets contention. We've talked about this in part during this study of Proverbs, but some people really do look for, and they kind of thrive off of, for lack of better terms, drama, right? We all know people that love to live off of drama. They're going from one argument to the next, and they're looking for something to be upset about or someone to be upset at. Well, a hot-tempered man is one who stirs it up. He's looking for it. He's looking for a fight. He's looking for an argument. I find it very interesting that we're talking about a hot-tempered man in the book of Proverbs, but you know what is in the qualifications of elders, they're not supposed to be hot-tempered. Why? Because that's not a peaceful way to go about teaching and spreading the gospel, right? If you are going to be looking for a problem, looking for a fight, then you shouldn't have any sway in the Lord's church, right? So a hot-tempered man stirs up strife, but he who is slow to anger quiets contention. We will learn a lot by letting our mouth be slower than our eyes and our ears. We're told about that in James, that we are to be quick to hear, but slow to speak, right? And we've used this example before. We have two of these, and one of these. These two are supposed to be faster than this one. But a hot-tempered man, he just busts through the door. He's ready to go. He's looking for a fight. He's looking at somebody he can yell at, somebody he can be offended at, and that's no way to be in the Lord's church. All right, number three. So crooked speech, lying or misleading information, a hot temper or anger, gossip. Proverbs chapter 16. So we'll just go one more chapter. Proverbs chapter 16, start with me in verse number 27. A worthless man plots evil, and his speech is like a scorching fire. A dishonest man spreads strife, and a whisper separates close friends. We've actually talked about this when we talked about friendship. Gossip does not create a good friendship. How many times have you ever gossiped about somebody behind their back, and then they find out about it and they come and thank you? Say, hey, thanks for talking about me behind my back. Never, right? Yeah, I've never met somebody like that. Because it's always an issue, okay? Remember, when we talk about gossip, we need to ask ourselves a series of questions when we are talking about someone else. Number one, yes, ma'am. Ungodly men dig up evil. Yeah. I mean, I like that phraseology, digging something up, or like we've mentioned multiple times, stirring. I mean, it's somebody's looking for an argument. But when we talk about gossip, that's a good observation there. When we talk about gossip, we need to ask ourselves a series of questions. Number one, is the information that I'm saying, is it truthful? Number one. Am I saying something that I know is truthful, or is this a rumor? Okay, the rumor mill is one that never turns off, and it is always ready to devour anybody. So number one, is it truthful? Number two, is the information that I'm telling and who I'm telling it to, is it helpful? Is it helpful? Are they going to help the situation, or am I just talking to hear myself speak? And then number three, would Christ do what I'm doing? If I'm telling some information to one brother about another brother, again, in the context of the church, if I'm talking about brother A to brother B, is this going to help the situation? Now, of course, in Matthew chapter 18, we have an outline of how to deal with arguments and disputes between each other. If a brother sins against you, what are you supposed to do? Number one, go to him alone. If he does not hear, again, this is talking about someone in sin. If he does not hear, I'm supposed to bring what? 2 or 3 witnesses. That has been the same since the dawn of creation. Under the old law, if you did not have 2 or 3 credible witnesses, you did not have a case. Under the law of Moses. So if I talk to you and you don't listen, you have sin in your life, you sinned against me, or whatever form it may be, I go to you. If you haven't heard me, I have 2 or 3 witnesses. And then what happens? If I don't get any headway with you after that, tell it to the church. Okay, that's the outline from Matthew 18. Okay, so we're not talking about necessarily... I'm not saying that every time we talk to someone about a situation, it's wrong. I'm not suggesting that. We don't have biblical grounds to suggest that. But is it truthful? Is the information I'm sharing and who I'm sharing it to going to help the situation? Number 3, would Christ be a part of this? And if the answer is no to any one of those, then it's probably in the category of gossip, and it's not going to help the situation. Okay, well, there's a lot of reasons why we gossip. Gossip makes us feel better. Sometimes we gossip in the case of our friends. Maybe we're jealous of one friend being closer to someone than us, and we might say something bad about them. There's all sorts of reasons. Jealousy, pride, anger, all of it adds to it. But gossip is never constructive. Okay, all right, so number 1, lying, misleading will bring contention. Anger or hot temper, and then gossip will bring contention. Next, getting into other people's business. All right, let's go to Proverbs chapter 26. Proverb 26. I didn't really know how to word this one, so I worded it very plainly. Getting into other people's business. Proverb 26, look at verse number 17 with me. Whoever meddles in a quarrel, not his own, is like one who takes a passing dog by the ears. Now, I've never made a practice of it, but have you ever grabbed a dog's ear when it's trying to run past you? No? Well, me either? Okay. We want to make a stance. The Arnold Church of Christ is against animal cruelty. Okay, number 1. Number 2, if you were to do that, you're probably going to get bit. Pretty safe to say, right? If you meddle in a quarrel that does not involve you, it's not going to be positive. See, being from Alabama, we have a phrase, and I don't know I don't know the etymology of the phrase, but when an argument doesn't involve you, you say, I don't have a dog in this fight. I don't have a dog in this fight. If somebody comes to you and is, hey, brother so-and-so, you can't believe what they did to me. I don't have a dog in this fight. I'm not going to throw my hat in the ring. I'm not going to reciprocate. I am not a part of this quarrel. You need to solve this quarrel in a biblical way and keep me out of it. You know how much happier we would be as children of God if we would learn to just say that? I don't have a dog in this fight. There are a lot of times where we do need to make a stand. Again, there's two sides to every coin. We do need to stand up, and we do need to speak out against false doctrine, and we need to do all those other things. But a lot of times when it comes to personal relationships, if it doesn't involve you, don't meddle with it. Don't get into an argument that doesn't involve you, because it'll make you happier. It'll make your life more peaceful if you stay out of it. But a lot of times we try to, in good nature, we try to help, and sometimes us helping brings more stress and drama in the whole situation and upon us. And so this is a very, very practical and very wise sentiment. Okay, let's read it again. If whoever meddles in a quarrel, not his own, is like one who takes a passing dog by the ears. You're going to get bit. Stay out of it. A lot of wisdom in the book of Proverbs, obviously, but I love the practical language. Any questions, comments on this first slide? All right, let's go on to the next one. Let's talk about solving contention. What does it look like to solve contention? Number one, I told you we'd remember this word. Let's go back to Proverbs chapter 6. Sowing discord is the word that we had looked at earlier. That was back up in verse number 19. He's talking about someone who is breathing out lies. It is one who sows discord among the brothers. Now, let's go up to verse 16. There are 6 things that the Lord hates. 7 are an abomination to him: haughty eyes, a lying tongue, and hands that shed innocent blood. A heart that devises wicked plans, feet that make haste to run to evil, a false witness who breathes out lies, and one who sows discord among brothers. Some versions might say among the brothers there. But either way, when you are stirring up, as some versions say, digging up, if you're taking part of this and you are comfortable causing division, whether it be in the secular family or in the family of God, that is not something God looks lightly at. That is something God hates, is the term used. Sowing discord among the brothers or among brothers is a dangerous game. We need to be very careful when we have disagreements and arguments with our brethren, because God is watching, and He is watching very closely. Now, I say that because I wanted to bring something up. I'm originally from Alabama, as everybody in here knows, or maybe don't. But the area where I'm from in Alabama, the church is very strong. In the county which my parents now live in, it is the highest concentration of churches of Christ in the United States. They live in Lauderdale County, Alabama, near Florence, Alabama. And in fact, in my parents' town, if you get in the car and drive to the congregation where they worship, you'll pass 8 or 9 church buildings for the Lord's church. And that sounds very great, and that's a lot of times there's a lot of positives that go with that. But what are some of the negatives that might come with that? Well, in the town where I was raised, I've never lived where my parents live now, but in the town where I was raised, among the congregations in the area, we had a group of 30 or 40 people, and they would just change congregations every few years. They were just like a little floating clique. And they would get mad at some brother or sister here at this congregation, and then they'd go to the next congregation. They'd stay there for 2 years, 3 years, and then they'd get mad at somebody here, and they would go to the next congregation. And they would just do this cycle. Give them 10 or 15 years, they'll show back up. They'll show back up at the one they started at. And they just kind of went around looking to be offended at people, and they never solved any issues. You got to remember, when the New Testament was penned, how many congregations were in Corinth? Okay? You have one of two options. If there is contention, if there's an issue in the church, you have one of two options. You can solve it or you can leave. But when you leave, you're not going to find another church family in the area. You have one congregation in each city. And so it forced people to have to solve conflict. But a lot of times in the modern day and era, we have been so spoiled that we can just, I get mad at congregation so-and-so, or I get mad at an elder, or I get mad at a preacher or a youth minister or a deacon or just a member. I can get mad at somebody, and instead of going to Matthew 18 and solving it in a biblical way, I can just pack up and I can go 15 minutes, 20 minutes, 30 minutes down the road, and I can just solve my issues by ignoring them. That is not a biblical example, okay? And people are so ready to split the church. That's a term I don't really like using. But some people are so ready to split the church. They're looking for an opportunity to sow discord. That is not healthy. That is not healthy in the secular realm, whether it be, in the case of this verse in chapter 6 of Proverbs. It's not healthy in the secular realm of a secular family. It's not healthy in the spiritual realm in God's family. We need to be very careful when we deal with conflict among our brothers and sisters in Christ. Any questions or comments on that? All right, let's move on to the next one. Stop talking about it. Again, we're just going to be very plain tonight. Let's go to Proverbs chapter 18. Proverbs 18. Let's take a look there, starting in verse number 6. A fool's lips walk into a fight. His mouth invites a beating. A fool's mouth is his ruin. His lips are a snare to his soul. Then we talked about gossip. We already did the gossip checklist. The words of a whisper are like delicious morsels. They go down into the inner parts of the body. Okay, so how do we start arguments, contention, fights? Starts with our mouth. 9 times out of 10, it starts with our mouths. And that's why we go to James and look at the wisdom in James that we are supposed to be swift to hear, slow to speak. All right. So number 1, how do I solve contention? Remember how God feels about it. Number 2, simply stop talking about it. Stop fueling the fire, right? Number 3, remember we are to work together. Let's go to Proverbs chapter 18, verse number 19. Same chapter, verse 19. A brother offended is more unyielding than a strong city, and a quarreling is like bars of a castle. Okay, let's talk about this for a minute. A brother offended is more unyielding than a strong city. Okay, putting it back into its context, in a war context, when you go to attack a city or conquer a city, you first got to break down the wall. Okay, remember Jericho? That was really hard to do. If a city had a strong fortress around it, it's really hard to conquer. Okay, let's take that into the New Testament, into the church. How am I supposed to conquer? What are we trying to conquer? We're trying to conquer sin. We're trying to spread the gospel. How am I supposed to do that if I cannot work together with my brethren? Right? Quarreling is like a strong city. It's a fortress. You can't get anywhere with people. If we can't solve the issues within our building, how are we going to solve the issues outside of our building? That doesn't make sense. That's illogical. Right? So we first have to work on us before we can go work on others. That's a concept that we find in 1 Timothy. In 1 Timothy chapter 4, when he says, take heed to yourself. To yourself first. Make sure you're doing everything right. And if you are, then you can save yourself and those that hear you. But first we have to work on ourselves. That's the whole driving factor behind the book of 1 Corinthians. And I'm not here to talk about 1 Corinthians because I have done classes on that in the past. But that's one of my favorite books. The reason why it's one of my favorite books is because each chapter is a different problem in the church and how to solve it. So chapter 1, they had division, and they were, so much so that it was spoken of by people that weren't part of the church there. There was division. They were taking each other to court. They had marriage issues, the meat offered unto idols. They were arguing about gifts and who had the better spiritual gift. That's chapter 12. There's so much arguing going on. And Paul starts the letter by saying, let me ask you a question. Is Christ divided? No. Is Christ divided? Paul was not crucified for you. Apollos, Cephas, none of these. Christ cannot be divided. So how then can we pretend to be all members of the same body, Ephesians, right? There is one body, but all be divided. How does that work out? If we all have the same guidebook and the same one that we're trying to imitate and emulate, then how do we come away with different results? See, we have to find unity, which was the driving force behind John 17. When Christ prayed for us, not only those who now believe, but those who would believe, he prayed for unity. I want them to be one, as you and me are one, he prayed to the Father. So, I say all that to say, remember, we're supposed to be working together. We are supposed to be getting work done outside of the walls of this building. But when we argue amongst ourselves, and it sounds like I might have an axe to grind. I have no axe to grind. I'm just presenting this lesson because it was in Proverbs. But it is wise moving forward as a congregation here and other places. Because I know a lot of you are visiting and you'll go back home to your own congregations. And hey, in a Sunday or two, you might be approached by brother so-and-so or sister so-and-so, and they're looking for an argument. But you have to remember, number one, how does God feel about this? Number two, I don't want to feed something that I don't need to feed. I don't need to put fuel on the fire. Number three, we're supposed to be working together. It's unfortunate, but I don't know how some people believe they're going to enjoy heaven. Right? I want you to think about that. So we're all supposed to be in heaven together, right? We're supposed to be worshiping together. We're supposed to be surrounding the throne and lifting up praises to God. If I cannot sit peaceably in a building with a brother or sister, how am I supposed to sit peaceably in heaven with that same brother or sister? Right? Are we not all on the same team? Building blocks and not stumbling blocks? That's what we're supposed to be. Okay? So it's time we ought to act like it. Okay? If the world looks at us and sees quarreling and fighting amongst ourselves, why would they want to be a part of it? Again, that's why Paul was talking about taking each other to court. He said, why can't you handle this in-house? Why do you got to take this to court where everybody can see it? Can't you figure things out on your own? Can't you learn to work together? If you're the judge sitting there and you have brother A and brother B and they're fighting over some mundane thing and suing each other over it, why would you ever want to be a part of that? It doesn't seem like a happy, peaceful environment because it's not. So Paul says, figure it out. Figure it out. All right. Okay, let's go on to number next. Proverb 22 and verse number 10. Proverb 22, verse number 10 to start. Do not associate with scoffers. Now, the word scoffers is easily translated into mockers. We might put it into the category of one who is stirring up, or as we said earlier, someone who's digging up, looking for a fight. Drive out a scoffer, and strife will go out, and quarreling and abuse will cease. Okay, if you want to avoid arguments and avoid contention, don't befriend contentious people. Don't befriend people who are looking for a fight. And we might laugh and pretend like we don't know who we're talking about, but we all do. We all know somebody that if you gave them the chance, they would fight with a fence post. That's what we say in Alabama. Brother so-and-so or sister so-and-so or my brother or my sister or my parents, they are so dead set on having their way, they would fight with a fence post. They don't have to have anybody talking back to them. They don't have to have any kind of reciprocation. They might just disagree with you just for the sake of doing it. Maybe they're just bored. I know some people like that. You could walk outside and say, oh man, the sky is so blue today. Well, actually, it's not blue. If you actually think about the atmospheric pressure, come on. I mean, some people are just looking for an argument. If you want to be living a peaceful life, just walk away. Don't talk about it. Remember, we're supposed to work together. How does God feel about this? I'm not going to feed it. I'm not going to associate with people who are looking for a fight. Now, does that mean I am supposed to stop loving those people? No. Of course, I'm supposed to love them, and I'm supposed to have their soul, in my mind. By every encounter I have with them, I should have their soul first in my mind. But I don't have to hang out with you. I don't have to make it a practice to associate with you all the time, if that's how you're going to act. All right, any questions or comments before we move on? Okay, all right. We have one more. My bad. All right, Proverb 26. Proverb 26. I wasn't sure if I could fit all of them on here. Proverbs 26, 20 and 21. Remove yourself from the fight. For lack of wood, the fire goes out. And where there is no whisper, quarreling ceases. A charcoal to hot embers and wood to fire, so is a quarrelsome man for kindling strife. If you want the fire to die, stop feeding it. I think that is so wise and so plainly spoken. A fire will go out if you stop feeding it. I don't know where the phrase comes from or why it's said, but my entire life I've heard the term, don't feed the monkey. Like, don't feed the monkey? What does that mean? Well, there's a monkey, a hypothetical monkey on your back. It's something ailing you. You can't get it off. Well, if you keep feeding the monkey, it'll stay on your back. But if you stop feeding it, it'll go away. That's the best way of understanding I got from that phrase. But if you stop feeding the fire, eventually the fire will die. Okay, if you stop throwing sticks on it, it'll go out eventually. Okay, so don't continue to feed the situation. Don't associate with people who are looking for a fight. Remember, we're supposed to work together. Stop talking about it, which goes into the point that we're looking at now. Remove yourself from the fight. And then remember, how does God feel about this? Okay, so that is solving contention. Now, let's look at it in practice. Examples of conflict resolution. All right, this is going to be from the New Testament. I brought up 1 Corinthians. Now, let's go there to chapter 8. 1 Corinthians chapter 8. Now, one of the big issues in Corinth, and if you've been in some of our classes on 1 Corinthians, you already know this, but one of the big issues is meat offered unto idols. Okay, we've talked about this quite a lot, but you have in Corinth a split congregation of Jewish converts and Gentile converts. Now, the Gentile converts came from a background of idolatry, and so when you would go to market, you would have meat that had been sacrificed to idols. So you go to the statue of Baal or Molech or whoever that idol would be, and you sacrifice an animal to it. Well, they don't want that meat just sitting there rotting, so they take that cooked meat, they take it to market, and they sell it at a discount. So if you are a Christian in Corinth and you come from a background of idolatry, being a former Gentile, if you want to put it that way, when you're walking through the market and you see that, you know it's association. So some people were walking through that market, they see that meat at a discount that had been offered to idols, and they say, I don't want anything to do with that. I don't want to support, I don't want to talk to, I don't want anything to do with idolatry. That bothers my conscience. But then on the other side of the congregation, you have a group of people who were Jewish in background. Okay, so they weren't raised with idol worship, and so when they go to market, they just see meat that's discounted. And so some of them will buy it. Hey, I got a good deal on it, and I don't even have to cook it. Why not? And so when they go back to the congregation, there's a big feud. Is it wrong or is it right? Can you eat meat that's offered unto idols, or is it a sin? Now, some people are saying it is definitely a sin. It's taking place. You're supporting idolatry. It's a problem. You can't do that. Other people are sitting back saying, this is not really a big deal. I mean, it's just meat, right? And so you have this big contention. So when we get to chapter 8, Paul's writing about this big issue and this big argument. He's saying, hey, it doesn't really matter. Idols, they're not real. They're made out of wood. They're made out of metal. It's nothing. But that being said, here's how he closes out verse 13, the last verse in chapter 8. Therefore, if food makes my brother stumble, I will never eat meat, lest I make my brother stumble. That is a powerful mindset to have. Okay, I might think it's not a big deal. I might not be, concerned with this meat that had been offered to an idol. But if you are, me thinking about you first, I'd rather be a vegetarian. If food is going to cause my brother to stumble, I just won't have any. That's fine. That's the attitude that Paul pushes forward. Now, later on in chapter 12, they're going to argue about spiritual gifts, right? And who has the better spiritual gift? Somebody stands up and says, well, I can interpret dreams. Somebody stands up and says, well, I can heal people. I can do this and this and this. And they're arguing over who has the better one. Now, when we get to chapter 13, and I know everybody focuses on love in chapter 13, as we should. I want you to understand, when Paul penned 1 Corinthians chapter 13, he wasn't happy. He wasn't writing, oh, love everybody, love. He was mad because it carries over from chapter 12. They're arguing about spiritual gifts, and how does he start chapter 13? Even if I had the tongues of men and of angels, if I had the greatest gift of all, if I don't have love as my driving factor, it's pointless. If I live my life as great as it may be, if I give away all my stuff, to the poor, if I give my body to be burned, if I become a martyr for this cause, if I don't have love, it profits me nothing. Well, what about my faith? Well, even if I had the faith to move mountains, if I don't have love, it profits me nothing. Do you remember in chapter 13 where he says, when I was a child, I spoke as a child, I acted like a child, but when I became a man, I put away childish things? When we get to 1 Corinthians chapter 13, he has been dealing with all the issues of chapters 1 through 12, where they're arguing with each other. Chapter 8, if it causes my brother to stumble, I don't want to eat meat. I would just rather be a vegetarian. If I don't have love for my brother and my sister, if I am comfortable with, what's that term we used in Proverbs chapter 6? Sowing discord. If I'm comfortable with that, then no matter what I do in my life, I will not be acceptable to God. If I am comfortable driving a wedge between the children of God, I can give away all the stuff that I have. I can have great faith, and in the days of miraculous gifts, I could have had the best gifts of all. But if I don't have love, if I'm comfortable separating the children of God, it profits me nothing. That's the context of chapter 8 of 1 Corinthians, chapter 12, and chapter 13. It all flows together. That's why I love this book so much. Any questions, comments on that? All right, 2 Timothy chapter 2. 2 Timothy chapter 2, Hymenaeus and Philetus. Some great baby names. For those of you who are about to have children, might I suggest Hymenaeus and Philetus. 2 Timothy chapter 2, and let's look at verse number 15 to start, and we'll drop down to verse number 19. Do your best to present yourself to God as one approved, a worker who has no need to be ashamed, rightly handling, or some versions will say dividing, the word of truth, or God. Okay, that's a verse we all know. Now let's look at verse 16 and following. But avoid the following: irreverent babble. Okay, avoid irreverent babble, for it will lead people into more and more ungodliness. Their talk will spread like gangrene. Among them are two names, Hymenaeus and Philetus, who have swerved from the truth, saying that the resurrection has already happened. They are upsetting the faith of some, but God's firm foundation stands bearing this seal. The Lord, number one, knows who are his. Number two, let everyone who names the name of the Lord depart from iniquity. Okay, so a couple things we can unpack from this text. Number one, is it Christ-like for Paul to mention the names of these two people? Again, we need to go through our gossip checklist. Is this something that is truthful? Is it something that is useful? Is it something that Christ would be a part of? Okay, we can assume, based on the other examples that Paul has of calling out people who were in sin, Galatians chapter 2, remember when he called out Peter? We can assume that he had done something like that with these two people. Number two, is it helpful? Yeah, of course it's helpful, because the congregations that run into these two men might get caught up in their false doctrine. Their false doctrine was that the resurrection, okay, not the resurrection of Christ, but the resurrection of us, the second coming, if you will, had already happened, right? That's a dangerous doctrine. That's not true. So Paul's trying to protect people, okay? And in this case, this false doctrine, how would Christ have dealt with it? How did he deal with any other false doctrine or false teaching? He would have called it out. So we've passed the gossip checklist, if you want to call it that. Number 2, what were they guilty of? Verse number 18, they have swerved from the truth. So at one point in time, they were brothers, or it seems to be that they were abiding in truth at some point in time. Saying that the resurrection already happened, they have upset the faith of some. Okay, it always goes 1 and 2. If you leave the truth, a lot of times you take people with you, right? So they had not only abandoned truth, but they also had taken people with them. Okay, so they have upset the faith of some. We find that also in Galatians chapter 2 when Peter was caught up in his hypocrisy, right? Even those around him started acting hypocritically. But God's firm foundation, verse 19, stands bearing this seal. The Lord knows who are his. Let everyone who names the name of the Lord depart from iniquity. Okay. In this case, we might add on to that, depart from iniquity, separate yourself from who? Hymenaeus and Philetus. So that was some conflict resolution in a little bit different light than 1 Corinthians chapter 8. Titus chapter 3. Let's go to Titus chapter 3. Paul encourages Titus in chapter 3, verses 9 through verse 11. Avoid foolish controversies, genealogies, dissensions, and quarrels about the law, for they are unprofitable and worthless. As a person who stirs up division, after warning him once then twice, have nothing to do with him. Don't have anything to do with someone. After warning them once and twice, separate yourself, knowing that such a person is warped and sinful, and he is self-condemned. Okay, so look at the progression we've gone through. 1 Corinthians chapter 8, work together with your brethren. Be the bigger person, take the high road, whatever you want to call it. Try to put your brethren first. Number 2, if it's contention with someone who is teaching false doctrine, call it out. Number 3, if people are just looking to start fights with you, don't have anything to do with them. Okay, so we have a little bit different scenarios in each case, but this is how you deal with conflict. Then finally, we have Romans chapter 12. Let's go to Romans chapter 12, start in verse number 16. Romans chapter 12, starting in verse number 16. Live in harmony with one another. Do not be haughty, but associate with the lowly. Never be wise in your own sight. Repay no one evil for evil, but give thought to do what is honorable in the sight of all. If possible, so far as it depends on you. I love the wisdom in that verse. If possible, so far as it depends on you, live peaceably with all. What can we take away from verse 13? I mean, not verse 13, verse 18, rather. What can we take away from that? Well, the first thing that I think of when I read verse 18 is that I'm not going to live peaceably with everybody. If possible, so as it depends on you. We've gone through this entire study in Proverbs talking about some people who just really like to fight. Okay, it's a hard thing to come to terms with, but friends, not everybody is going to agree with us. We might preach the truth plainly. We might preach the truth in love, but that does not mean that everybody in the world is going to agree with us. Okay, Jesus warned those who were coming after him that if they hated the teacher, they're going to hate the student, right? Okay, so if we are living a life like Christ, if we are preaching the same truth that Christ brought, not everybody's going to love us. Not everybody's going to appreciate our information. Not everybody's going to agree with us. Forget about personalities. We're just talking about the truth by which we live our lives. Not everybody is going to love us. I say this to the kids all the time. I cannot control how people react. Okay, if I introduce myself to somebody and present myself as a Christian, present myself especially as a preacher, I cannot control how you react to that information. What can I control? How I react. That's all I have given, that's all the power I have. I can control myself. As it depends on you, if possible, Try to live peaceably with everybody. Did Paul get along with everybody? No. We just read about 2 men that he called out, Hymenaeus and Philetus in 2 Timothy. Okay, not everybody's going to appreciate it, but I can do my side of things. I cannot feed into quarrels. I cannot talk bad about people. I can try to live a good life. I can try to take the high road when given the opportunity. But anyway, that's some thoughts on conflict resolution. As we see in the New Testament, there are plenty of other places we could go. And one I would like to take a peek at in Galatians chapter 2, but it's not on the screen. It's one we mentioned several times, but I want to talk about this for just a second. In verse number 11 of Galatians 2, we find this issue with Peter. It says, when Cephas came to Antioch, I opposed him to the face because he stood condemned. For before certain men came from James, he was eating with the Gentiles. But when they came, he drew back and separated himself. So translation, Peter, being Jewish, he would eat with the Gentiles so long as there was no other Jews in the room. But when other people came in the room who were Jewish, he would stand up and act like he didn't know the Gentiles, which is incredibly wrong. And it's especially wrong based on the fact of Acts 10, who was the person who preached to the first Gentile convert? Peter. So that being said, he would take part of this hypocrisy. Verse number 13. And the rest of the Jews acted hypocritically along with him, so that even Barnabas was led astray by their hypocrisy. But when I saw that their conduct was not in step with the gospel, with the truth of the gospel, I said to Cephas before them all, if you, though a Jew, live like a Gentile and not a Jew, how can you force Gentiles to live like Jews? Now, the point of reading this story is Paul and Peter had a disagreement. They had a bump in the road, a problem in their relationship. Does that mean that Paul hated Peter? Does that mean Peter hated Paul? When Paul separated with John Mark, remember that? That didn't mean he hated them. Just because we have arguments with our brothers and sisters does not mean it's the end of the relationship. It just gives us a better opportunity to go to Scripture, look at conflict resolution. I can't handle how other people react, but I can handle myself. Am I living the way I'm supposed to be? Am I spreading gossip? Am I conducting myself in a way that is adding on? Or am I handling myself in a Christ-like manner? Any questions or comments before we close it out? Yes, sir.
He was just really outspoken, but 2 Timothy, I think it is, where he calls out Demas. Remember in his letter,
Demas has forsaken me.
This present world left me. And then you've got Philemon where he's mentioned and he's praising him. So, that also shows us he didn't hate the guy.
No.
He tried to want him back, but also that guy walked with apostles and fell away. So that can happen to anyone. So we have to be so careful and guard ourselves.
Yeah, we can never talk about that enough. How do you take a man in Peter? Okay, we have the whole scenario with Acts chapter 10. He preaches to Cornelius. He has the vision. Don't call what is common, don't call something that is clean common, right? And then he preaches to Cornelius. He stood up in front of Jesus and said, I will not deny you. I will die before I do it. And 30 seconds later, he denied him 3 times. That's the beauty behind 1 Corinthians 15:33. Be not deceived. Evil communications corrupt good morals. And the reason I bring that up is the first part of that verse. Be not deceived. How many people are deceived to think, I'm strong enough. I'll never fall away. I'll never sow discord. I'll never argue with my brothers and sisters. Never say never. But when something bad happens, what do? I go back to conflict resolution in Scripture. Great points. Thank you all so much. We have one more class next Wednesday, and then we will wrap up this study. So thank you for your time.